Are you ready to go? Just give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go. Just asking Minister of Education, are you ready to go? Just give me a thumbs up if you are. Minister Johnson, can you hear me and give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Thank you. Minister Awasco? Minister Wasco, can you hear me? If you can, please give me a thumbs up.
Should I just go downstairs? Yeah.
Minister Wasco, can you hear me? If you can, give me a thumbs up.
Okay.
No, that's fine. It's awesome. Okay.
Minister Wasco, we can hear you. You can hear us? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Thanks, Mr. Schuler.
You got it?
We will be.
Once again, Mr. Wasco, can you hear me? If you can, give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Will the committee supplies please come to order? This section of the committee supply will now resume consideration of the estimates for the Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning. Questioning for this department will proceed in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions. The Honourable Member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be back this Friday morning looking and getting into the estimates for education and, just determining the direction that the department is going in and what we can expect moving forward for 22-23. I do want to acknowledge, Mr. Chair, we do have people in the gallery today, and I just want to welcome them to the committee room because this is an important part of democracy, one that not a lot of people get to see and witness. And today it's, like I said earlier, it's great to have people in the gallery, so welcome. I will just get right into this, Mr. Chair, and we'll also continue with questions that are global in nature. I will say, Mr. Chair, I'm finding it somewhat interesting because I know this government does talk about transparency, the need for the public to know how departments are working and the pieces included in that. So when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking and reflecting back on the estimates book, Mr. Chair. Back in 2019, 2020, the estimates book for the Department of Education was actually quite extensive and granular, Mr. Chair. Found it quite informative and did give a real clear direction as to where the government was going with the Department of Education. Now, 2 short years later, we have an estimates book that is somewhat less concise and really difficult to discern exactly what direction the department is going in. So I would like to ask the minister, and my first question is, how is this estimates book able to provide the necessary detail to determine what direction the department is going in?
The Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. And again, yes, absolutely, Manitoba is a great place to live, work, and play, and raise a family, Mr. Chair. And so, just to concur with the member from Transcona, that's the beauty of being here in Manitoba and being able to have people in the gallery and witness the democratic process here. And I think more and more we need to do. I know I can't really speak to some of the policies and ways of doing various different things and how we educate the public on the processes and the various steps of government here, Mr. Chair. But I know we in the education system are working on various different things to get information out to the public so that they're more than aware of the different steps and how government works, and that goes with committee rooms and absolutely everything, and especially during the estimates process. So to answer the member's question, so the format for estimates and for the estimate booklets, the budgetary supplemental expenditure documents, the government changed the format in 21-22. So that's what the document is in front of you, my friend from Transcona. But in addition to that, what we have is the balanced scorecards, which basically is totally transparent. It's available to the public. And those balanced scorecards also have targets attached to them so that everybody can see exactly what are the steps, the goals, the missions, and the progression as far as what the department is doing. And as the member knows, in January, my department, education and early childhood learning, was created. We brought in early childhood learning because it is just a great synergy. It totally makes sense, and absolutely have to applaud Premier Stephenson for that move. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I'd just like to remind the Minister of Education that we can't use proper names. So like Premier Stephenson, please just use Premier. Thank you. The honorable member for Transcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad that we're working out all of the machinations and how to, conduct business this morning. It's always a lesson because, we don't nearly have enough time in estimates and to get down to the nitty gritty here. I will talk a little bit more and ask the minister a little bit more about assessment. We do know that during the past 26 months, it's been a challenge in schools for assessment. And I would assume for the department as well, Mr. Chair, because a number of assessment tools have had to have been suspended, not undertaken. And this, of course, gets back to the department because the department then doesn't know how students are progressing, at what stage they're at, et cetera. And so with the challenge of the past 26 months, what type of assessment data, other than report card data, which I do know that the department collects, what other pieces of assessment data has the department been collecting so that they can get an idea of how students are progressing in Manitoba? I'm thinking specifically of the grade 3 assessment that would go on. I'm thinking of the middle years assessment, and I'm also thinking of the assessments that were used in high school.
The honorable minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, the member knows. I mean, he was a early years teacher and an administrator for his 30 plus years in the education system. I mean, this year would have been my 28th year as a teacher and guidance counselor and working with students at all different levels, Mr. Chair. With student services, a little bit in early years for myself, but mostly middle years and senior years. But I'm not quite sure. The member might need to put a little bit more on the record in regards to what he was referencing. So I'm going to just basically go with that he was talking on the positive side of how all this works. But he knows that our teachers, educators, staff, they assess and reassess on a daily basis. They work with their students. As far as the pandemic goes, even before the pandemic, teachers were finding new and innovative ways to make sure that learning had continued. before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. I mean, we're having those conversations with school boards, with school divisions, educators. The department has met with all 37 school divisions to make sure that our framework for learning, which again, the member from Transcona doesn't reference all the good things that are going on, unfortunately, but that's okay. The day after, when we launched the action plan on April 20th, we actually also launched the framework for learning, which all school divisions, school boards, and senior admin had absolutely applauded. So with that, I know he mentioned also the assessments at the early years level and the middle years, and also the senior years. So the grade 3 and 4 assessments have started again. And keep in mind, this is on top of the day-to-day assessments that teachers and staff are doing. And the 7 and 8 assessments have started again. We have suspended the grade 12 assessments right now, but then again, that doesn't exclude any of the day-to-day assessments that are going on from our hardworking teachers and staff at the various different levels within our K-12 system. And we just continue to have that dialogue, open dialogue, with our education partners at various different levels, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was asking for specifically, Mr. Chair, is has the department collected any assessment data from school divisions in the sense during the pandemic? And, if not, not to provide a reason, but at first I kind of want to know if data has been collected, and then if it hasn't been collected, what's the plan moving forward for the department to know what level students are at?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I mean the member knows how challenging it has been over the last couple of years, and especially and for all Manitobans and Canadians and people all across the world, basically, to specifically talk about assessments as he asked for a specific answer. So here we go. The 3-4 assessments had started again as far as the provincial assessments. That was getting collected in the fall. The 7-8 assessments had started getting collected in the winter, and we're getting that information. Again, teachers are assessing and reassessing on a day-to-day basis. We're also taking a look at, of course, the K-12. The commission basically asked for the provincial enhanced programming, basically a system level check, and again with the framework for learning, it definitely highlights the fact that we want to support teachers in their classrooms as well. Anything that they need to build upon what they already know in regards to assessing and all of that type of stuff. We are still tracking credit attainment at the grade 9 level. We're still checking and collecting data on the graduation rates. We are looking on, the framework, and I'm hoping, again, it's been a few days since we've been in estimates, and I'm hoping the member took it upon himself to take a look at the framework for learning and maybe read the action plan, and then also our Indigenous inclusion framework for learning called Mama Tuisuin. So hopefully he is, if he hasn't, hopefully he's asked his staff to give him a bit of a summary on that. And again, I'm more than willing to have a briefing with the member. I know that we've shared many great conversations in regards to education in the past, and definitely open to any type of briefing that the member would like to have on any of the topics or all the topics that I've spoken about.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do know that there was an announcement earlier in the year regarding moving assessments at the high school or at the senior years from grade 12 to grade 10. And that was interesting. I would like to ask the minister, what was the assessment department thinking about in the Department of Education and moving that from grade 12 to grade 10? What is the thinking behind that, and what do they wish to accomplish with that?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm hoping that the member from Transcona, my colleague in the education world, I'm hoping he's not going down the path of trying to say that teachers aren't assessing. So I'm going to answer his question, then get into an additional teachable moment, as we say at times. So basically what had happened is, unlike many years ago, we have in our government, we have had the opportunity to to bring people in and to collaboratively have conversations about education. So there was a summit, there was a literacy and numeracy summit in 2018. Maybe the member's aware of that, maybe he's not, but that's okay. There was a numeracy literacy summit in 2018, January of 2018. There was well over 800, I believe, participants that was engaged, and they overwhelmingly suggested that the grade 12 provincial assessment be moved to the grade 10 assessment. And for many years, I mean, I taught pre-calculus at the high school level myself. And even when I was teaching pre-cal back in the mid 2000s, 2005-ish, somewheres in there to 2008, maybe even a bit earlier, I was always wondering, like, so we're doing this provincial assessment, and I know it's a snapshot, but we're doing assessments on a day-to-day basis. Why were we doing a provincial assessment snapshot at the end of their K-12? Now, part of that rationale makes sense to me, I guess, right? They want to see, how the students are doing at grade 3, 4, how they're doing at 7 and 8, and how they're doing at grade 12. So the overwhelmingly advice from the summit, also from the K-12 Commission, plus, and again, I'm referencing that action plan because it's a great K-12 action plan, which is a roadmap to student success. It's mentioned in there as well, to move that grade 12 snapshot assessment to grade 10. And I'd like it to actually quiz the member, but I know that's a little bit different. But in his professional opinion, why does that make sense? It makes sense to me because, again, it's a snapshot. All these teachers are doing assessments at every grade level on a day-to-day basis. And why are they doing that? So they can assess where their students are at, be flexible and nimble within the curriculum to be able to change and adapt what they're teaching to each individual student's needs. So the recommendation to move it to grade 10 is so that, okay, we're taking a snapshot here at grade 10. They've got another 2 years of secondary school. Is there any gaps? Is there any other learning needs that these students need? Any other supports that the teachers need? That's pretty much it. Totally makes sense. I know that the member from Transcona would more than agree with me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to reiterate that I was genuinely curious as to some of the rationale behind that. Certainly, we all know that teachers assess continually and they have a variety of tools, but this is more specifically, I was trying to get to the thinking that the Department of Education has, because I do know that the department wants to collect the data so that they can make informed decisions based on the data that's collected. And because we've been in this past 26 months, have been in this kind of an upside down way of learning, that I was genuinely curious as to the thinking behind that, Mr. Chair. And I'm happy to hear what the minister said in his response. And I'm also willing to take up the minister on his offer to have another briefing and talk about assessment. I would certainly look forward to that, Mr. Chair, because this is an important piece, especially moving forward, right? Because all of this, Mr. Chair, impacts eventually the supports that we're providing kids in schools. And of course, the best of support for kids in schools, Mr. Chair, is that classroom teacher, that teacher in front of them. And we do know that that's certainly been challenged lately, especially since 2016. We've been seeing some real cuts and constraints to the public school system. And I know assessment data is critical in ensuring that we plan not only for success, but also have a plan in place that is proactive in nature, that is based on assessments that have been collected for a number of years, so that we can make informed decisions, so that we can provide the services that kids require in their classroom experience. So I look forward to an invitation from the minister regarding that briefing. He knows how to get a hold of me, and like I said, Mr. Chair, I'm looking forward to that. I do want to stay on this sort of the pandemic theme piece and how it's impacted kids in school and kids out of school. We do know that the pandemic had a significant impact, Mr. Chair, on attendance and enrollment. A number of parents at the height of pandemic decided to homeschool their children. And in this vein, I'd like to ask the minister, can his department provide a pre-pandemic number of homeschooled kids, and how does that compare to the current number of kids that are being homeschooled?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with the 5 minutes of questions and answers, so I've got a couple little notes and tidbits that I wanted to mention, and just to show that my friend from Transcona, that I am listening to him. So I'll start, I guess, up at the top. First of all, I totally know that the questions that he was asking in regards to assessment, and as I mentioned to him earlier, and I think he knows that I'm also being sincere, as he is on his questioning. I'm being sincere about the briefing, so we'll definitely, get him that briefing on that framework for learning document and additional things for sure. I do have to say, in regards to the member continuing to put misinformation on the record, and as he continues to do it, I'm hoping I don't have to slide that word to disinformation, that he's doing it on purpose. But In the last 2 years, we have funded education to the tune of about $327 million of more funding over the last 2 years. That's over a 17.2% increase. When he's asking the question specifically, so I'm sort of going in chronological order to how he was asking the questions. So in regards to enrollment, in 2019-20, there was homeschooling. There was just about 3,689 students. In 2020-21, there was 8,027 students. In 21-22, we had already seen the majority of these students start to make their way back. So that's 6,149. And, of course, the member from Transcona being a former administrator, he knows that at the end of September of each year, he has to try working with the school division to get the numbers into the department as far as the enrollment within the schools and all of that type of stuff. And we know that those numbers sort of trickle in, I guess, throughout October of each school year. And so that 6,149, that is the number that we have reported and trickled in from this past October. But we also know that school divisions and school boards and school leaders, including us in the department, have been working very diligently and closely with communities to make sure that they're very much aware that and that we're strongly encouraging students to get back into the public school system. And so we anticipate that those numbers are quite a bit less today. We'll know more come this fall, of course, but also just to assure or to anticipate a potential future question that the member is going to ask. We also, within that $327 million of funding, the 17.2% increase to education, we also were making sure that we were funding school divisions to basically balance off that reduction in enrollment due to the pandemic pressures. So schools and school divisions had not seen, we worked quite closely with the school divisions to make sure that, because of course funding, as the member knows, generally under the present model, which we're doing a funding review, is based on enrollment, and we just made sure that no divisions were penalized for a reduction in enrollment due to the pandemic. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And those numbers are quite interesting. I want to thank the member for providing those numbers. I didn't realize that it was that high in 2021. And I do know that the department said that they were using the numbers from before the pandemic to determine base school funding. That's a very important number that every school leader looks forward to seeing later in October, based on a number on September 30. I would like to ask the minister then, for September of 2022, are we going to go back to that September 30 number, or will we continue using an average of the previous years?
The Honorable Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And in regards to funding, and I believe I understood the member's question correctly, is that, and just to clarify to him, and again, he knows this because he's an administrator, was an administrator. So the funding for school divisions was announced in February to all school divisions. And as we've been doing over the past 2 years since the pandemic had started, we are taking a look at numbers. We are watching those numbers. We are in constant communication with school boards and school divisions and senior leadership, the department and IR. And as we move forward, we're going to continue to see what impacts the pandemic continues to have on our enrollment within schools. And so those numbers are adjusted as more information comes in, and how the pandemic has actually impacted or as the students come back to public school system.
The Honorable Member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What the frame documents outline, Mr. Chair, is a steady decline in the provincial contribution to public education. In 2015-16, Mr. Chair, the provincial contribution to public education was 62.4%, or $1.404 billion. In 2017-18, it went down to 60.3%. And the actual dollars of the provincial government contributing to public education remained flat at about $1.4 billion. Mr. Chair, in the latest frame, the provincial contribution is 58.2%, or $1.45 billion, which means since 2015-16, the actual provincial contribution to public education has only gone up roughly $50 million. That's in the frame, Mr. Chair. In February of 2022, the government did announce a 1.34% increase to base funding to public education in a high interest environment. In an environment now since 2015-16 where inflation is reaching close to 22%. An extra $50 million over the 6 years doesn't cut it to meet the needs of students. It's outlined in a frame as to those numbers, Mr. Chair. It's quite clear. Right now, this core service of government is being starved. Starved of the human resources that it needs, Mr. Chair. We're seeing it tangibly evidenced by teacher layoffs. We've outlined those in question period. They're well known in Seven Oaks, Brandon School Division, a number of smaller rural school divisions. The minister likes to talk about a $300 and something million increase to a budget. That's factually untrue, Mr. Chair. If that were the case, teachers would not be being laid off. EAs would not be losing their jobs. We still have a very difficult time understanding how, as we emerge from the pandemic, a 1.34% increase in base funding is going to meet the needs of students, Mr. Chair. And this is a real concern. When it When this government took office in 2016, they began a systematic reduction in support for schools, fiscal support for schools, shifting the burden onto school boards. School boards then having to raise property taxes, but then tying the hands of school boards because they couldn't raise them enough to make up, even just to maintain their base level of what they had the year before in human resource complement. So my question for the minister, Mr. Chair, is how is a 1.34% increase in base funding going to meet the needs of our students coming out of this pandemic?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know what? I more than appreciate actually this question coming from my friend from Transcona because, you know, so when I was elected in 2011, many of the funding models, I mean, I was actually in that chair that he's sitting in back quite a few years ago, Mr. Chair, as education advocate. And some of the cases, I mean, I was still relatively early on in my political journey, and he knows as well as I know, it's amazing on how many things that you end up learning. And nobody's got any textbooks on this stuff where you can actually go and read up on a lot of this stuff, but there is information out there. And so when the member puts on the record various different numbers and things, and I mean, talks about the frame report, which when you talk about the frame report and the one that the member is referencing, this is from 2020, 2021, and that is a budgeted frame report. What is not included in the frame report, and you know what, I'm going to give the member a bit of a pass on this because I didn't know necessarily all of the inner workings and the additional fundings that went from the provincial government to school divisions and school boards, so that they could then make the decisions that they make. And the member references teachers and EAs and all the support staff within school divisions, and he knows that it's because I know that he doesn't want me interfering with school boards and trustees' decisions on what they do with the money that they're given. And so the frame is a budgeted amount, and this is sort of operational dollars. But in addition to that, there is various amounts of money that is allocated and given towards school divisions. So I'll just list off a couple. We know that and he knows that the funding model is old and antiquated, and we're in process to start to redevelop, speaking with our education partners all across the province of ours, to come up with a better funding model. And what that means is taking that chunk of money and being able to send it out to school divisions and school boards more fairly and equitable. It is unfortunate that the previous government didn't feel that they ever needed to actually embark on this, but we are doing it. So what the member is almost deliberately not putting on the record, but I'm going to give him a pass on that, is that we have also, in addition to the budgeted amount of monies, we have given $80 million in January, and an additional $77 million to school divisions outside of the base funding through that formula. Why did we do that, you may ask? Well, we did that because the funding model, if you just threw that money into the funding model, it would go back into that funding model and then not be dispersed fairly and equitably where that money is needed. So that's why we did that. Those types of dollars do not show up in the 2020, 2021 budgeted frame documents. We also, throughout the pandemic, we had allocated over $250 million to support our school divisions, schools, and school boards. Also, what is also not included in the frame report is capital expenditure. All the monies that is spent on schools in regards to capital. So in the last 2 years, our capital allotment was $160 million. And we've added $100 million on top of that each year. So we've upped the capital by $260 million for the past 2 years. We also, Mr. Chair, I'm going to run out of time. We also increased our additional funding by $1.6 billion over 4 years. I'll explain more in the next answer.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what I'd like the minister to understand is the real life consequences. What happens at a school level when a provincial government isn't a willing partner in ensuring that students get the support they need. A 1.34% increase in base funding has direct impact on the classroom, Mr. Chair. I outlined some of them. I can go into a more granular level at the school level. I can say in some middle schools that are about 400 to 500 that are in my constit, we're seeing a reduction in student support teachers. Middle schools going from 2 resource teachers down to 1.5. Losing block funding in order to support kids with additional needs. And then, of course, that having an impact on the number of EAs that can be in a school, Mr. Chair. These are the real world impacts of that. Capital funding is one thing, but that doesn't keep the lights on in schools that are currently functioning. And what we're seeing, as clearly outlined by the frame documents that the minister referred to, is a systematic decline in provincial funding, base funding for schools. And that has impacts on the classroom, has impacts on kids and families. This question was not about the department interfering in what school boards are doing. This question was about having a real partner in the provincial government to ensure that kids get the services that they need, Mr. Chair. With this level of funding, it's becoming more and more of a challenge. After 5 to 6 years of this, we are at this point now where not only is the system tired because of the pandemic, but the system feels like it just can't provide the support necessary. Here's another tangible example, is that we're starting to see school boards having to make really, really difficult decisions now because of the increase in fuel costs. And that is a direct result of forces that are out of the control of that school board. So we're talking about places like Evergreen, Lakeshore, with transportation, where they're transporting a majority of their kids, Mr. Chair, having to make some really difficult decisions. And so I'll ask the minister again, how does a 1.34% increase in base funding respond to the needs of kids coming out of this pandemic?
Order. Order. The Honorable Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's evident to me that my colleague, my friend from Transcona, the MLA for Transcona, is doing a little bit of cherry picking. And so what I mean by that is that on one hand, he's talking about the frame report from 2020, 2021, which is based on the budgeted amounts, not the additional funds that have come into play. Now, on the other hand, he's talking about fuel prices. So can he please focus? It's unfortunate that the member continues to put misinformation on, and I'm telling the member, I'm close for calling him out on disinformation, because he's refusing to listen. I'm listening to him, and I'm answering his questions. I'm explaining the additional monies that have been allocated and given directly to school divisions to help keep the lights on. I'm not sure if he doesn't understand the operational dollars versus the capital costs. I added the capital costs in there. Well, what do you think keeps the lights on? Capital costs, the maintenance costs. That's the additional $260 million we have provided to school divisions over the last 2 years. And that's each year. So that's $520 million. Mr. Chair. Holy smokes, we're gonna go for a little bit on this, because there's, again, the member is totally working on a 2 years ago, but what I want to applaud the member is the fact that he did say that funding to schools had gone up. He did say that funding to schools had gone up. He said it. Now, we have also, in addition to that, due to various wage pressures, cost pressures, just like he mentioned, fuel bills are up, right? Not only in Manitoba, across Canada, continue to go up. Rate of inflation. It's a tough go for everybody. So I don't want him thinking that this is only affecting him. This is affecting our students. It's affecting our families. COVID affected our families, our students, absolutely everybody involved. Not only in Manitoba, though. Not only in Canada, but across this whole great country of ours, Mr. Chair. We have given, again, $80 million in additional funding this past January for the 21-22 school year. We've then given an additional $77 million. That's additional money in the 22-23 year, which is coming up. All that funding was given, announced the end of February. And he knows that we are working, and this is probably what's bugging him, is that we're actually working with school boards and trustees and school leadership to have these conversations about the different challenges. The only one that is not accepting the fact, I'll say the ones, plural, that is not accepting the fact that we've gone through a pandemic is the member opposite and his NDP team. I'm asking the member to stop being so political and actually see what's in front of him. He's looking at the frame report from 2 years ago, which he admitted funding went up. Take some time, Google over the weekend the news releases that we have done in regards to additional funding to school divisions for education to help us through the pandemic. Over $250 million additional dollars allocated to help with that, Mr. Chair. I look forward to his next question.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a number, and I've said this to the minister. The very fact that base funding is only increasing 1.34% has real-world consequences at the school level. The minister needs to understand that the provincial contribution is clearly indicated by the frame reports has been in decline since 2015-16. You cannot dispute that, Mr. Chair. And it has, as I've mentioned earlier, real-world consequences at the school level and to kids in the system. One of the largest pieces here is we needed to see a plan post-pandemic that addresses clinical support in schools. The member also knows, or sorry, the minister would know, that clinical services have been greatly disrupted these past 26 months. And now there's an opportunity to ensure that clinical services get delivered to the kids that need those supports. In 2018, some of the wait times for psych assessments were at 6 to 8 months. Those wait times now have increased to close to 20 months. Speech language supports, as the minister knows, have also been in higher demand. Reading recovery, higher demand. Reading tutor programs, higher demand. These are the challenges that are facing Manitoba students coming out of the pandemic. And what they need is a provincial government that's a willing partner to address these needs, Mr. Chair. So I would like to ask the minister, what are the plans to ensure that clinical supports are being supported by the Department of Education to ensure that they get to the kids that need them?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, I appreciate the member's question, and basically, again, much like other things that are going on lately, it just shows that we need to, in addition to how much collaboration and work we're doing within the sector and our education partners, it also just shows that we need to do a better job of highlighting the information out there, because the member, even in his role as education, I'm going to say critic, because I'm sensing the tone that he really doesn't like my old tagline of education advocate, because he refuses to to put some of the facts on the record. But that's okay. I sort of know where he's coming from. He's following, some of his leaders' self-supportive talking points. I was hoping to have a little bit more of a collaborative question and answers, and I'm going to continue to go down that path of just keeping it high level and making sure that we're talking about the facts and what is happening within our school system. So and again, I appreciate him putting on the record that that funding has gone up in education, and he hasn't quite given the full accolades of the total amount that it's gone up, but that's okay. He'll get there once he gets himself some of the factual information, or gets his staff to pull up some factual information for him. So a lot of this money that is given sometimes it's outside that funding model, and the reason for that is because of the collaborative approach not only our government but the department and I have embarked on, actually having conversations with the front lines, with our school boards, with our trustees, with our superintendents, with teachers, educational assistants. He fails to remember that we have multiple connections all across this great province of ours that know both of us. I worked in the student services realm for quite some time. I worked from the early years to the high school. I appreciate he's coming to us from the early years standpoint and the administrative standpoint, and that's why I really feel that from him coming from the administration side, he should know some of this. So in regards to student supports and special needs funding, we have actually given an additional $5 million last year, an additional $7 million this coming year, which I'm just going to give him the percentage because I know he likes percentages, is an increase of 8.2% over the last 2 years. In addition to $80 million and $77 million, so $80 million for this current year that's coming soon to completion at the end of June, $77 million, which is going to start in September, which has already been allocated, been given outside of the funding model. Why is that? Because the former government didn't do anything with the funding model. Even though administrators like himself stood up and said, we have to do something with this funding model. Why is the government not listening? That's what they said to the NDP. Well, sir, we're stepping up. We're doing it. We're taking a look at it. We're changing it. And the reason why we're giving all those dollars outside that funding model is why? It's so that those funding dollars, millions and millions and millions, can go to specifically where it's needed. How do we know where it's specifically needed? Communication with the sectors and consultations with the sectors. That is with all of our education partners. That's how we know where those dollars and cents are going and have to go. And that's why we're committed to over $327 million, 17.2% increase over the last 2 years.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do know that, and this has been established, that the frame documents are really important. We do know that the latest frame document that I was referring to was released in May of 2021. I would like to ask the minister, can we expect the newest frame to be released shortly, since it is May of 2022?
The honorable minister.
Yes. But in addition to that, Mr. Chair, because I ran out of time on my previous answer. So yes, the member asked and answered question. Yes, yes, yes. The next frame report is due out shortly, Mr. Chair. The member asks questions about the fact on, enhancing supports, working with our school clinicians. I know he has firsthand knowledge working with our school supports and clinicians throughout his school and school division, as do I. Still talk to many of them. I don't think he's giving quite the credit where credit is due as well. So in addition to our educators, our school staff, our administrators, our senior admin, our trustees, our school boards, they've had to be really flexible and nimble over the last couple of years. And I think that they've all done that. And I would not exclude our school clinicians on that as well, whether it's school social workers, speech and language pathologists, psychologists, school division psychologists. They've had to be nimble as well. They've had to adapt to this hybrid way of doing things as far as assessments and working with students. And because they all, like I mentioned the other day in one of the speeches, we talked about a calling, because they've had a calling to this great profession, working with students. And so they're going to do everything within their power to be able to make some of these changes and adapt to various things. We've launched also a mental health and well-being strategy with targeted funding to make sure that we're enhancing the resources, tools, and supports that are required. But not only by staff, but for students. The strategy is going to continue next year. That's an additional $5 million. And again, just to put an exclamation mark on this, that's over and above that funding model that the member continues to go to and continues to ignore the fact of all the additional dollars and cents that go out there, Mr. Chair. Also, within that, he might have heard this, in the last year or so, but the Teacher Idea Fund, we're specifically asking teachers, and I ask him to maybe, put the partisan stuff aside and actually reach out to some of his former colleagues. I know he talks to them. I know I talk to mine. Put the ideas in, because there's no monopoly of great ideas. I know that the NDP think that they have the monopoly on good ideas, and if that's the case, we wouldn't have to fix all those messes that we inherited in 2016, Mr. Chair. But with that, I want him to encourage teachers and people within the sector, with our partners within education, to put in their ideas in regards to the dedication to mental health and wellness. Because we have embraced that of the collaborative approach, the listening approach, the doors are always open approach to coming in and have those conversations. I do know, I did want to put for my last few seconds here before the next question, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, is that the River East Transcona, because that's where he used to teach, over the last 2 years, the River East Transcona School Division has received a 12.2%, that's a $12.3 million increase in funding. This figure does not include additional support for COVID-19 costs. And as the member knows, school divisions, school boards take these dollars, they've got priorities, and they put those dollars where they feel the priorities are within their school divisions.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do know that the minister has referred to the there's a new education funding model that's coming downstream. I do know that late last year, the government did announce it was creating a consultation team to work on this education funding model. And this is something that came out of the Commission for K-12 Education. Can the minister provide the names of the people on this team and the experience that they bring to this consultation group?
The honorable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed that the member went on the funding model review, which is great, and I'm going to provide him some names of the review team members. And I know that he really didn't want to carry on with the whole River East Transcona School Division money that we've given to them, because it's a good news story. It is a good news story. And we're working hard with our education partners all across this province of ours. And he doesn't like that. Many of the NDP supporters don't like that. You know why they don't like that? Because myself, the department, and our government are being collaborative, working with, and we're being transparent on how to improve education for our students and build on existing excellence within our school system, as opposed to what had happened in the under the previous administration, and yes, I'm going to call it out, 17 years of NDP mismanagement, absolutely, where there was many discussions on their side that had happened behind closed doors. We've got plans, even though the member refuses to read them. We are making changes for the good of our students and our staff within the education world, Mr. Chair. So the funding model review is one of those changes that we're doing. Why? Because for many, many, many years, many of our stakeholders, our education partners have said, hey, we need to take a look at this because the funding is going in and it's being sent out unfairly and inequitably. And it's not going to the places that absolutely need it the most. So that's why we're working with everybody. Doors are open, arms are wide open, working with people. So the review team meets a couple times a month. We've got from DSFM, and for the sake of time, and I might need some more time, so I'll have to ask for leave. Division Scolaire Francophone Manitobain, so I'm not going to work on acronyms, I'm going to read it out. We got Rob Dupré-Olinick, who's Secretary Treasurer. We have the Family Advocacy Network of Manitoba, Teresa Cronin. We have the Indigenous Services Canada, Derek Bradley, he's the Regional Program Manager. We have the Manitoba Association of Parent Councils, better known as MAPC, Brenda Brazeau, who's the Executive Director. Manitoba Association of School Board Business Officials, MASBO. Amanda Senkowski, who's the Secretary Treasurer. We have Manitoba Association of School Business Officials, MASBO, Wayne Shimizu, Secretary Treasurer. Manitoba Association of School Boards, School Business Officials, Brian Spurl, Secretary Treasurer. We have the Manitoba Association of School Superintendents, MAS, Pauline Clark. She's president. And yes, she's from Winnipeg School Division. Manitoba Association of School Superintendents, MAS, Representative Stephen Ross. He's a superintendent in the rural. We got Manitoba Federation of Independent Schools, Robert Prasnick. He's the superintendent at the Archdiocese. Manitoba First Nations School System / Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, George Maristy. He's the executive director. We've got the Manitoba School Boards Association, Alan Campbell. He's the president of MASBA. We also have Floyd Martins. Any familiar name? Manitoba School Boards Association, Floyd Martins, trustee, rural. We have the Manitoba School Boards Association, Sandy Nemeth, trustee, familiar name, worked with Sandy for many years. Manitoba Teacher Society, Joseph Orbansky, policy analyst. Post-Secondary President's Council, Associate Dean of the Faculty of Education, Dr. Leslie Ebley Trudell, formerly Assistant Superintendent of Sunrise School Division.
The honorable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm grateful to be here to have an opportunity to ask some questions about early childhood education, and I'm grateful to my colleague Noah for inviting me to be part of this. Before I start, I also just want to say that I'm also grateful to be part of our Child Care Caucus, the NDP, to work with my colleague Nello, our colleague Malaya Marcelino, and previously with our colleague Danielle Adams, who unfortunately is no longer with us.
Order. Just want to remind their members that please, if you can refer to the colleagues from their constituency or their ministry. Thank you. The honorable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to start, Minister, by asking a bit about something that I think is a real concern for our childcare sector here in Manitoba and for the health of it on an ongoing basis. You know, we've had 6 years of operating grant freezes to our childcare centers. They've undergone 2 years of incredible challenges throughout the pandemic. And if you speak with childcare centers and you speak with directors, as I hope you have, you hear from them a pretty clear message. And that is our childcare sector is currently in crisis. Our childcare sector is in crisis right now. And that's a message that I hear over and over. I know my colleagues hear over and over. And that ties to, of course, the funding freeze, but it also relates to the impacts of that funding freeze in terms of the ability of centers to retain and hire staff. And that's because the wage levels that they're able to pay are poverty level wages. They're incredibly low wages. And so, of course, all Manitobans were very excited to know and to learn about the significant investments that the federal government has committed to making here in Manitoba into childcare. They're bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars, which is welcomed, of course, and is good news for this province. But the concern for many is that we still haven't seen any commitment from this government as to how they're going to be using those dollars to improve wages for childcare workers in this province. So I'd like to just give the minister an opportunity to help us understand what the status of their plans are to improve wages for childcare workers in Manitoba. One thing I do want to flag that is of concern is that the Canada-Manitoba Childcare Agreement contains a wage grid. And I think there's something of real concern in there to childcare workers in Manitoba. That issue of concern is that the wage grid outlines target wages for CCAs and ECE2s that are below the current average wages for workers in those same roles. And I'm using the numbers that are all from that same agreement. So that's got a lot of people concerned that ultimately these dollars that are coming our way won't be used to do what's needed to bring wages up to a level that are fair and that will allow centers to do what's needed to hire staff and retain staff. So hoping the minister can speak to their intentions to raise wages, whether or not they have developed a wage grid, and hopefully some clarity around why the average target wages in that agreement are below the average wages that are in place right now. And again, I'm just using numbers that are from their agreement that they signed with the feds.
the Honorable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I guess I'd like to start by absolutely, we've said it multiple times, but I don't think it can be stressed enough that whenever a family member passes, is absolutely tragic, and it's absolutely brutal. It's absolutely brutal. I'm thinking I shared this earlier, but it might have just been in the condolence booklet to Danielle's family. But I definitely want to say again, from the bottom of my heart, I couldn't imagine having to go through what Bill, Nick, and Jack are going through with the loss of their partner and their mom. It's absolutely horrendous. Now, moving forward, and I appreciate the member for St. James' question on early childhood learning and daycares and wages and all that type of stuff. And I'm hoping that with him being the new, I don't know if it's fully being announced, but I'm assuming he's going to be the new advocate. I'll say advocate until I hear otherwise. Advocate for early childhood learning. I know that we'll be able to work closely together as time moves on in a collaborative approach. I want him to know that these are opportunities, and these are great opportunities, especially now that early childhood learning has been brought in to the Department of Education, which I think is absolutely long overdue. I'd like to thank the Premier. I learned from previous things, Mr. Chair, your tutelage on making sure that we're not using direct names. So I'd like to thank the Premier for making that happen, because we have an incredible team in education and early childhood learning. We have so much good news that has already been announced with the federal government, and Minister Gould, I know, has congratulated our government and me personally as well, and our department for being leaders across this great country of ours. Manitoba is a leader in Canada. Minister Gould has said it. So what is great is that we have committed to make sure that we strengthen the sector. We've got a great working relationship with Jody Kale and Karen LaFleche, who is with the sector right now. We have multiple conversations with frontline services there as well. We're making sure that we're taking a lot of that, Canada, Manitoba, pan-Canadian agreements and working towards making sure that we strengthen the sector. And it's not only creating new childcare spaces, which the former government should have, started doing or started planting those seeds on how we were going to staff this sector, but we're doing it. We're getting it done. A lot more work yet to do. We right now have been working on that wage bridge. And what that means is we're taking people within the sector who are making certain wages and bumping their wages up. And soon, there's going to be a really good news announcement on what that wage grid is going to be looking like. Before we go on to the member's next question, or if I can continue, I did want to say that the organizations that I provided the list for the funding model review team, those organizations have actually provided the reps for our team on that funding review. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no misinformation out there.
The honorable member for St. James.
The number that childcare workers have been hearing for, since government announced that they'd signed the deal with the government of Canada is $25 an hour. I think that's what we've heard in the chamber. We've heard the government repeatedly announce that. Your predecessor also used that number. And, in my conversations with childcare workers, there is an expectation because of what this government said about wages that they would be raised to an average of $25 an hour. That workers can expect that's coming. Can the minister confirm that workers will see overall wage increases that will approach what they've suggested here at $25 an hour?
The honorable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member brings forward a really good point, which I failed to say in my previous answer. And the good point that I want to bring up is the hard work of my predecessor. So the Minister of Families worked very hard with her department and the federal government, building those relationships. And I like to think that that with the Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning, we're continuing that good relationship with not only our sector, the staff, the boards, and much like the work that we've done with my education critic, I'm going to do with the early childhood advocate. And it's being open and transparent. And so the numbers, I know the member wants numbers. And so he knows, or I think he knows. And if he doesn't know, here comes another teachable moment. We're lifelong learners. It's always good to learn new things, or maybe not new things, because I think the member from St. James does a lot of his homework and reading, I believe. So he knows that a lot of our our daycares within Manitoba are run by boards, and they make many of the decisions and again prioritize. But in 2021, because I know the member from Transcona likes to go on the 2021, so I'll help out the member from St. James, that the average for all ECEs was 1766, and our target is 2492, and our average, which includes all directors, everybody involved, the average in 2021 was 2294, and the target for all staff is 2589. when we again, we're working with our federal partners, making sure that we're increasing seats. So we made a promise of 23,000 new seats, and I was sort of hoping that the member might start off in good faith and congratulate us on not only that, but also increasing the various wage grids or income grids for subsidies. We announced that as well. So I encourage the member for St. James to get his staff to pull out all those great news releases for him. And there's more good news to come. So we've actually provided subsidies to another 12,000 individual spaces. That brings us to 18,000 subsidized spaces. And again, that's 3 times or 300% increase. That's about 50% of the childcare spaces in the province of ours. So we've had a lot of great news. We need to make sure, unlike the previous government, we're making sure that we're creating strategies, working with the sectors to recruit, train, and retain people within the industry, within the sector, with our partnerships, to make sure that we've got a sustainable childcare program here in Manitoba moving forward for many, many years to come. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to the next question. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. James.
Yeah, I would suggest that with the minister's last comments, it's not clear to me that he's been speaking with people in the sector and having conversations with directors and with people working in the sector, because I don't think that they would agree that this government is helping them to build a workforce for our childcare needs of tomorrow. In relation to what he said about target numbers, I just want to get clarity, because it's a little confusing, because the agreement that his government signed with the feds, and I'm just reading right out of the agreement itself. So this isn't, these aren't my numbers, these are your numbers. It states that right now, the average wage for a CCA is $13.59 an hour. That's the current wage for a CCA right now, according to on page 36 of the Canada-Manitoba Childcare Agreement. CCAs make up about 65 to 70% of our childcare workforce right now. So this is a big deal. This is most of our childcare workers fall into this bucket. The target wage in the same plan on page 49 and 50, the average target wage for a CCA is $13.11 an hour. So the average wage in the same document, $13.59 an hour, and then the target wage in the same document is $13.11 an hour, a 50-cent reduction or 50 cents less. This is the vast majority of our childcare workforce. So I guess I'd like the minister to kind of square this circle and help us understand. He's using numbers. He said 2589 as a target for all staff. That's a big number. And I think we'd all love to see our childcare workers start to be paid wages that reflect the importance of the work that they do. But there's a big gap between that and what we see in the plan. Can the minister help us understand the gap there? Why does their plan commit to a $13.11 target wage for CCAs, which is below the current average wage, when he's just shared that they're seeking a $25.89 wage target for all staff?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do appreciate the question coming from the member opposite. I know that the member has some numbers, so I'm going to give him some factual numbers. He knows, I know that that CCAs are very important within the sector. Absolutely important. February of 2021, when I was Advanced Education Skills and Immigration Minister, our government launched a skills, talent, and knowledge strategy, which then works with the education sector, and that's now the education and early childhood learning sector, as well as our post-secondary sector, and all our education partners and business, and looking at labor market needs. And we created the strategy so that we could start being a little more nimble and flexible in regards to what do we need out there as far as labor and workers. And I think it's a great document. And I think, it's not only housed in Advanced Education Skills and Immigration, it's a whole of Manitoba approach, making sure that we've got people with the right skills, talent, and of course, knowledge to fill those gaps that we have within the systems. Another, I think, coming from the education world, I know the member doesn't, but he, of course, went to high school and then post-secondary after the fact. But I think what was a great initiative done up by our government was to provide a high school course, which has always been in play, Families 40S, with a component in there of the 40-hour course required to become a CCA at the grade 12 level. I think that's a great initiative. And I applaud all the students and all our CCAs for taking that 40-hour course and taking a look at, as we continue to move forward. And I did want to just, correct the record. I know the member is putting numbers out there, but this is coming from the department. So I'm going to put some correct numbers on here. So within the agreement, it is strongly encouraged to have CCAs, and this is advice to the boards of the childcare centers. Now, I'm not sure, and the member can correct the record if he'd like, or put whatever he needs to put on the record. I'm not sure if he's really strongly encouraging me to interfere with boards, because it almost sounds like that. But within the agreement and the actual numbers that are happening in the province of Manitoba right now, the target is to have 2/3 of the workers on the floor working with kids and youth and students. 2/3 of them must be ECEs. 75% of facilities in Manitoba have met or exceeded this trained requirements. And so what our government is doing is giving opportunities for post-secondary training, and we're working with our post-secondary partners to make sure that we're being a little more nimble and flexible, so that those CCAs who are absolutely needed, necessary, important cogs in the wheel, to get trained up if they'd like to. And so that's why we're also offering a grant to upskill as well, if they so would like to be. So with that, Mr. Chair, I look forward to the member's next question.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
There are a number of childcare workers watching the proceedings today, and I'm sure that they're feeling the same disappointment that I'm feeling right now, having heard what the minister just shared and his failure to answer the question. Of course, it's good to help CCAs get the training they need to move ahead. No one would dispute that. But what we've just heard the minister seemingly double down on is that there is no intention to raise wages for CCAs, and he didn't dispute the numbers that were provided, which again aren't my numbers. He said he was going to put numbers on the record that were correct and seemed to suggest that mine were false. To be clear, I'm using his numbers, not using my numbers. The lower average target wage for CCAs that I offered was his government's numbers. So strange that he would suggest that I would put false information on the record when it's coming from him. In terms of this question of interference or suggestion of interference, or that I'm suggesting that they should direct childcare centers to pay certain wages, that's not what's being recommended. What's being recommended is that the government identify target wages that are fair. Ideally, they look to the wage study that's been done by the Manitoba Childcare Association for those targets, and then they fund childcare centers appropriately through increases to their operating agreements. So it is really disappointing here to hear that we're not going to hear clarity over when childcare workers can expect their wages to increase. And I want the minister to know, and I just kind of put politics aside, and I think this is a really important message that needs to be conveyed today. There are a lot of childcare workers that are just hanging on by a thread right now in our system, that are waiting for this government to clarify how they're going to increase their wages with those federal dollars. They're waiting for that. And when they find that out, if those numbers don't approach what we need to see in terms of fair wages, we're going to see a mass exodus of workers from our system. And it's not my thought, or this isn't my just coming from me. This is what we hear from childcare workers and executive directors all the time. And that's going to come back to Manitoban families. It's going to really hurt families. This is critical. This is about the future of our system, the future of childcare in this province, the ability of families to access good quality childcare. This is key. So we need to see this government make a clear statement soon about what they're going to be doing to raise wages for workers. And if they are planning on lowering wages as they were, or at least not moving them up as is outlined in the agreement with the federal government, that will be a disaster for our system. I'd like to move on to ask the minister a bit about the subsidy rollout. Again, we know the federal government is generously bringing hundreds of millions of dollars into Manitoba to help increase affordability of childcare in this province. We've heard the government, our provincial government here, talk about their desire to see us move to $10 a day with those funds. This is a positive. We're glad to hear that they're going to use those federal dollars to benefit Manitobans. But there's some huge concerns that we're hearing about right now in terms of this subsidy rollout. And I'm sure the minister is hearing this as well, and I'm hoping he can help us to understand what's going on. The subsidy went live in early February, and the change of the subsidy, it modified it so it increased the subsidy level to include families up to a net income of $83,000. Childcare centers were asked to administer this new subsidy without clarity or information on how that was supposed to be managed. And as a result, we've seen in every different childcare center different experiences for families. And what we're hearing is that certain families, if they applied for the subsidy in early February, just by chance of applying for it, even if they didn't fall under the $83,000 income threshold, have been getting full subsidy and free childcare. Other parents who didn't hear about this because the government did announce it haven't received anything. So if you are in a childcare center where you heard about this and you applied, you may have saved thousands of dollars and gotten free childcare, even though you don't qualify for the subsidy, and another childcare center, you've received nothing. Can the minister clarify what has happened here with this subsidy rollout?
The Honorable Minister.
Mr. Chair. So the member from St. James, even though he's relatively new to the chamber, I can already tell that he's sort of a master at putting certain things on the record. Because later on today, what he'll do is he'll go and clip his little section, and then he'll go and take a small snippet of how I've answered, and he'll put it on social media, and that instead of sending the link to the whole story, Mr. Chair. So before I answer his final part of his question, I have to go back and correct the record on some of the misinformation that he's put on the record. The numbers I was correcting of his was the amount and the percentage of various different roles and responsibilities and education levels of different people working within the sector. And again, hopefully he clips this part, but he probably won't. But we will direct people to the whole story, is how important CCAs are to our industry. But then in addition to that, much like he would be doing with his kids, children moving up in through the K-12 system, we always encourage people for post-secondary education, whether that's a certificate, whether that's a diploma, a degree, a master's degree, a doctorate, whatever. We encourage people to get as much post-secondary education as possible. So I want to put it on the record, Mr. Chair, that it worries me that this member, the member from St. James, is putting false information on the record. We are acting. So he talks about CCA wages. That's why we're acting on this. That's why we are working with our sector, listening to the people who are working front lines, as opposed to just going into the media and just repeating something that he is potentially read there, or staff has picked out maybe a small little bullet. That's why we're acting. That's why we're working. We know that this sector needs to have recruitment, training, and retaining. That we know that, and that's why we're working with the federal government. That's why we're working with the childcare sector. That's why we're working with the school boards, or the daycare boards, and also school boards, making sure that we have a strong workforce in place. The announcement happened February 3rd. An additional announcement happened February 22nd of the subsidies. A webinar was done in March. Circulars were put out around the same time for more information. We did some prepayments of funds to those childcare facilities, because they can then make those decisions within their facilities. Those boards can make those decisions within their facilities to either waive parent fees as we continue to move forward. Because keep in mind, this is new. This is not something the NDP ever thought of doing. Not a zilch, zero. Did these ideas come from the NDP? I'm telling you that. And I know for a fact the working relationship between our government, myself, our Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning is far better with the federal government now than any relationship that the NDP had with the federal government. So we're working with them to strengthen the sector. Do we have more work to do? Absolutely. But how does that happen? By listening and working with, as opposed to putting misinformation and fear-mongering out to the sector. So I'm hoping the member clips the whole story, as opposed to tweeting out the little tidbits that he's so famously known for. I'm looking forward to expanding and ensuring that this sector is supported. And in addition to that, making sure that those childcare spaces, the subsidized ones and the non-subsidized ones, are stronger than ever in this great province of ours, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for St. James.
The federal dollars that are coming forward that are supposed to make childcare more affordable should be especially focused on helping lower income families in Manitoba. And, I just had asked the question about the subsidy rollout in the hopes that the minister could help us all understand about what his government intended or what they were hoping to achieve with their rollout. But I'm going to help him understand what's happening on the ground. In February, when it was rolled out, any families who learned about it, if they happened to apply, regardless of whether or not they fell underneath the $83,000 net income cap, were all given free childcare. Those families, again, I'm going to repeat, any family, $200,000 a year, $500,000 a year, were given free childcare if they happened to apply, even though, according to the government subsidy estimator, they shouldn't have qualified for it. At the same time, we have a huge number of low-income families and middle-income families who could really use the help, who never heard about this subsidy, who've lost out on all of this income benefits, these childcare cost reductions, because they didn't apply. So again, I'll repeat, if you happen to have been lucky enough to have applied in the early February, even if you were way over the subsidy level, you were given 3 months of free childcare. So we're giving out free childcare to everyone in this province, using those federal dollars and giving them to everyone. And I understand that the subsidy has just been extended for another 3 months. So if you happen to be a low-income family or middle-income family that wasn't lucky enough to happen to apply or have heard about this, you just missed out on thousands of dollars potentially of cost savings for your family. So there's something absolutely wrong with what's going on here. I can tell you that centers are confused. I want to ask the minister right now, is the plan of their subsidy rollout to give free childcare to everyone in this province, regardless of their income level? Is that the plan for the subsidy? Is that the intention here? Because that's what's happening on the ground. Is that the plan for the government?
The honourable minister.
No. And I am appalled by the line of questioning by this member and the false charges and allegations he's putting on the record. If the member, the new childcare critic, so you've lost the advocacy tagline that I'm given, critic, if he needs a briefing on how this works, again, my door is open. Since he's become the child care critic, I have not received one piece of correspondence from him alerting me that he is the critic or from his party. As the member from Transcona knows, my door is open. I am open to having conversations. I am open to having briefings. So if the member from St. James does not understand or is confused, or if he's getting verbiage that seems to lead him down the path of being confused, absolutely. I am more than collaborative and transparent with giving him a briefing on how this is working. The department has provided $75 million to improve the affordability of childcare through in advance subsidy payments to facilities. The member for Lactabani, who is myself, because I can't reference my name, nor the department, makes those decisions on where those subsidies go. The facilities makes those decisions. And then families apply through the childcare subsidy program, in which I shared with the member, and pull out the news releases, do some reading, do some homework. Don't just punch the clock at 5 o'clock and go home. Do some homework. The province has provided an advanced subsidy payment to child care facilities across the province to prepay all subsidy payments for a period of 6 months. February 6th to July 23rd, 2022, covering 3 consecutive months for families waiting their approval. This will allow families to apply and not pay any parent fees during the application period. The prepayment given to childcare facilities, number 1, helps facilities to immediately enroll children. Number 2, prevents interruptions to childcare services for families now applying for a childcare subsidy that already have a child enrolled in childcare while subsidy applications are processed. Number 3, it waives parent fees for families that have applied for subsidies and are waiting for their application to be processed for up to 3 months. We are moving from 6,000 subsidized daycare spaces in Manitoba to 18,000. I know the member was not in government in the 17 years of mismanaged NDP rule, but I am appalled that the member, as opposition critic for childcare, for early childcare, comes in and starts spouting off things that are inaccurate, that will then fearmonger, because I've got every bit of faith in those childcare centers, in those childcare coordinators who are working
Order.
diligently.
The hour being 12:30 p.m., committee rise.